Hello, I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, an Institute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. This presentation is entitled From Garden to Garden, the Sacred Triduum. And indeed, we're going to be looking at the ceremonial of the Latin Church during Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday through the Vigil of Easter inclusive. Preparation is everything. But before I get too ahead of myself, on the screenshot, I'd like to get my announcement in. And appropriate to this liturgical presentation, I bring to your attention and mine our Liturgy and Devotions page. And here you can learn how you may join us for the Divine Office online during the week. We have at present Sext and Compline on offer, more or less Monday through Friday, and special things during the month, the Office of the Dead, for instance, and even different feast days, the Transitus of St. Francis. And you can see our permanent link and our schedule on the site. And you say, what on earth do liturgy and devotions have to do with the school? To which I easily reply, everything. The purpose of a school is to enrich culture. And the highest expression of culture is worship, is liturgy. And so it is most appropriate. I am presently collecting my thoughts for our 11th anniversary here at the Institute. And as I say in my address, every school has a social end. It just happens that we're upfront about ours. Every single school has some social axe to grind, usually, as I believe it, for some parasitic end. Public schools, for instance, are made to make public workers who will have their labor stolen by capitalists for the remainder of their life. And that seems to be, what most of the people want anyway. So I guess I can't give the public schools a hard time for being honest. I think it's pretty much what all these so-called alternative schools want, or at least their patrons want, the parents want, a nice, successful worker when all is said and done, to which I must ask, what is the point of homeschooling and unschooling and road schooling and nature schooling and unschooling? What the hell is the point of all of these modalities when we're producing exactly the same people? And we're bragging, in fact, we're bragging that the students that come out of these so-called alternative educational backgrounds are just as successful. Look, the colleges, look, the bosses, look, the capitalists want to recruit homeschoolers. They want to recruit unschoolers because they have this, that, and the other quality. Well, I have to ask, how alternative is this then? I mean, we seem to be resigned to this system. I mean, you getting what I'm saying? Anyway, I'm getting off track here. I'm getting way off track. You can stay tuned for the 11th anniversary video on Holy Saturday, speaking of the Triduum, soon enough. And I will continue to ask myself questions and respond to them, which is the sign of a madman, in fact. Anyhow, Liturgy and Devotions, check that out. That's your plug for today. All right. Now, this presentation is entitled From Garden to Garden. And that's what we want to put everything in the focus of. The story, the liturgy that the church presents before us is one of returning to the Garden of Eden. And the second time around, it will be a happier place than even it was before the fall. One of the great poetic lines of the Western liturgy we hear on Good Friday is actually, we hear it on Holy Saturday. And this isn't scripted, so I'm going to mumble and bumble and stumble all around here. But it's actually in the Exultet. And it's the expression, "O felix culpa," "O happy fault." The deacon will sing on Holy Saturday at the Vigil in the Exultet with the Easter candle, amongst other many other things in the Exultet hymn. "O happy fault, O necessary sin of Adam, which gained for us so great a Redeemer." And that's first and foremost in this presentation where we want to anchor our theological and our liturgical foci on these 3 days. We are returning once again to the garden to walk with God in the cool of the evening. And the church will give us no shortage of allusions to this fundamental restoration or apokatastasis that we'll see. And in fact, apokatastasis, which appears in Ephesians, God restored all things in Christ. Restored is the English meaning of the Greek word apokatastasis. I think Ephesians chapter 2, we sing it every Monday in the office. God restored all things in Christ. That idea of restoration, of apokatastasis, is actually of a higher degree of restoration and perfection than there was originally. And that's exactly what we're looking at here. Oh, happy fault, oh, necessary sin of Adam. God writes straight with crooked lines, and so we have this tragedy of sin in human life, and yet it brings about a final restoration greater than if there had been no fall to begin with. All right, we should art, and I thought, as opposed to coming up with bazillion tabs and whatnot, I would just have the Google image search, and occasionally I will allow myself Jehovah's Witness artwork. So here's another take on walking with the God in the garden there. Anyway, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is always good for its distinctive art. But let's define our terms here. When we speak of the Triduum, we mean certainly Holy Thursday, Good Friday, and Holy Saturday. And the Triduum is actually very similar to the word Trinity, meaning it has the concept of threeness and oneness. So, tres unitas, we get our Trinity, 3 in 1. Well, when it comes to the Triduum, we get, tres diebus, or tres dies, 3 days. So what we're faced with in these 3 chronological days, liturgically, is 1 day. This needs to be understood very distinctly to understand at hand. That Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, with the Vigil inclusive, is considered by the Church a single day liturgically. Consequently, the subsequent Easter octave, the days of Easter, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, through Saturday, and actually through Low Sunday, the following Sunday, are considered 1 day as well. So in liturgical timekeeping, it does not keep up with always strictly chronological timekeeping. So keep that in mind. We're entering a different realm when we enter liturgy. And part of that is the fact that the Church will play around with what a day means. It's not always a chronological 24-hour block like the Freemason calendar people limit us to. So the Triduum is one single mystery. And likewise, what is the mystery? It consists of, chronologically, 3 things, basically. The suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus. As far as the Church is concerned, this is one single event. The suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus is considered one event, and it is called, in the singular, the Paschal Mystery. So the Triduum is chronologically 3 days, and yet it is in reality 1 day. Likewise, we are chronologically looking at 3 categories of mysteries, but the Church considers it one single mystery, and that mystery is of the redemptive act, or the Paschal Mystery. Okay. As we dive into things here, these comments will be most appropriate to the Latin Rite of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church has 23 different rites and many dozens of sub-rites and usages within them. These remarks are limited to the Latin Rite, and I will be making reference to both the books in force, what once was called the ordinary form, as well as the prior books, principally the 62 Missal. And that's something that as you get older, and as I get older, as we all mature, please God, that we learn to appreciate. And that is the fact that the Catholic Church has never had a single liturgy within the different rites, the 23 rites of the Church. There's never been a single liturgy. And one of the signs of Christian maturity is not to get hung up on a single liturgy or usage in the Church. And you will find tremendous wealth in every single liturgy and usage in the Church. And I've come to really appreciate whether that's reading different monastic rules in the East and the West, or different devotions, switching up devotions from time to time, or indeed diving in to different liturgical books. No liturgical book, no edition can ever encompass the totality of the liturgy. They're all going to have their strong points, and they're all going to have plenty of weak points. And we want to take that into account, and feel free, especially when it comes to these larger liturgical mysteries, to dive deeply into how the Church has understood these mysteries, both now and in the past, in the East and in the West. In the future, I would like to, as I do a similar presentation on this each year, look at the Eastern Rite, principally the Byzantine Rite and the Syriac rites. But for today, we're just going to stick with the Latin Rite, and we're going to take advantage of the present books and the former books. A great resource that you can easily access on our website for all things liturgy is at the bottom here. We have the 4 volumes of Pius Parsh's Year of Grace. And volume 2 is your man if you want to dive into the season of Lent and of the Triduum. Indeed, it takes it right through Holy Thursday, and then the following book takes us on the other days. So this is a great resource. It was published, I believe, in the 50s, and it's interesting. Pius Parsh was I think a Czech or an Austrian liturgist. It's interesting when he's writing how many of his suggestions ended up in the present Roman Missal. Speaking of resources here, I have in front of me the Roman Missal, 2002. I have the 62 so-called Latin Mass Missal, and I also have before me on the little table the Liturgia Erarum. I also have, nerd that I am, the Germ. I have the general instruction of the Roman Missal, which are the rubrics for the present Mass ceremonial. So I guess a modern version of the book of Leviticus. All the little details that true nerds will get into. Okay, so we're going to just briefly recap Holy Lent. And we remember, again, drawing deeply from the Church's history of the season of Septuagesima. And I have certain thoughts about what the future will hold liturgically, but I imagine maybe in 100 or 200 years that Septuagesima will be restored in the Latin Rite. There are certain things that have consistently stayed around. I think in the next 200 years, you will see Septuagesima restored to the Latin Rite, as well as the Ember Days, which exist on a national basis, more or less, depending on your country. But they've largely fallen out of use. And then you will see a restoration of the Pentecost octave, which I believe is the greatest violence to the liturgy shown at the Second Vatican Council, or at least in the wake of the council. Many good changes, I would argue, but the axing of the Pentecost Vigil is criminal, and I will behave myself and just leave it there. But I think these things will come around, because you can see that they are persistent amongst the faithful and amongst the clergy. So anyhow, getting to Septuagesima, getting from garden to garden. The Church in those 3 weeks prior to Ash Wednesday begins shucking in its fasting disciplines various things such as meat and cheese, and in the spirit of things we would also chuck out booze and sugars and other things of that nature. To the reality, and again, we have, the church is very generous on its legislation. That's fine, human weakness and whatever, but we want to move beyond just basic legislation into the spirit of the law and the spirit of our liturgical heritage. The reality is that the ideal, let's say, for Lent is basically to become a vegan. Why? Why should a Christian become a vegan, so to speak, at least temporarily? Because we're going from garden to garden. We are preparing in Holy Lent and Passiontide to walk with God in Easter time, as Adam and Eve did. And the reality is they didn't eat meat and dairy. They ate veggies. And so the church, in its fasting discipline, restores us, invites us to that restoration, at least, by removing all of these post-fall foods from our diet. And the reality, too, is that whether it's alcohol or sugar or cheese or all sorts of yummy dairy or meat, these are very taxing on the system. And if you're eating veggies and fruits, you do have more concentration. And in fact, we see in the monastic heritage of the church, East and West, the same diet all the time. St. Benedict says in the Regula that the life of a monk is a perpetual Lent. And it's a perpetual preparation to walk with God in the garden. Hence, you have the vegetarianism of many monasteries. So that's why the church has this discipline. It's not simply for privation reasons or to test the willpower. We might associate that on the lay level of devotion or popular piety. That's fine. But there's a deeper reality at play. And we get into that during Septuagesima. Something else we get into Septuagesima, because we really do want to see the Triduum as the completion of this cycle, is the fact that the church places before us in Septuagesima proper the story of Adam and Eve in the fall. And then in Sexagesima, the story of Noah and the flood. And then in Quinquagesima, we see the sacrifice of Abraham and Isaac. And so we have these three great pillars of the Old Testament, these three major stepping stones. And really the whole of the Lent and Easter liturgies have the best of the best of the Holy Bible in them. It's one symphonia. It's one giant story, really, from Septuagesima Sunday all the way to the Pentecost octave, drinking deeply from the church's liturgical heritage. And I should point out, again, these other parallels, Septuagesima, 70 days till what? 70 days till Easter. And we're going to have many, many parallels, of which we only briefly have occasion to mention in this summary of Lent as we get to the Triduum. But 70 days in the medieval period, the churchmen saw in this a parallel between the 70 years of captivity. So whilst we're in Lent, we are in exile from God. We're not only preparing to return to the garden in the biggest, most meta sense during the Triduum and indeed all of Holy Lent, but also the church does place before us other things, not just significant events in salvation history, Adam and Eve and the fall, again, Noah and the flood, and Abraham and his sacrifice, his at least a willingness to sacrifice Isaac. But also the church places before us a definite reoccurring parallels. And besides the creation, the initial creation of the world with Adam and Eve, compared to the recreation of the world of Jesus Christ with the Paschal mystery, also consistently throughout the church's liturgy, she places before us the captivity. And so it's very interesting in Septuagesima, 70 years of captivity in Babylon. Why are we in captivity? Because we're slaves to our sin. We begin Septuagesima, right? We begin with this meditation on the exile of the Hebrews from the Holy Land in the very number of 70. What's very interesting to me as I think out loud here is the church returns to the captivity motif during Passiontide, during the last 2 weeks of Holy Lent, where we see the prophet Jeremiah, the great prophet of the captivity and of the destruction of Jerusalem, once again return. So there's tremendous parallelism that we see here. Now, another major parallel that we see through, especially weeks 1 through 4 of Lent, is the parallel of the Exodus story, which we read in the breviary, to that of Christ as he's preparing with the devil. And so we see the parallel of Moses and Christ, and the parallel of the crossing of the Red Sea with the Paschal mystery on Mount Calvary inclusive, and then of course, the Pharaoh with the devil. That in a sense, what Moses does is a type of the much greater exodus that Christ leads us through. And indeed, Luke in chapter 9, during the Transfiguration account, has Moses and Elijah, and this took place about 6 months before the Passion on Mount Tabor, has Moses and Elijah speaking to Christ. And what are they speaking of? Luke uses the word Exodus. Moses and Elijah spoke to Christ of the Exodus that he was going to accomplish in Jerusalem. And so through weeks 1 through 4 of Holy Lent, we see the parallel of the Exodus story. All right. And then weeks, you had this period of celebration, and partially that's the kind of the echo there. Now, in later reminiscences, Laetare Sunday is kind of interpreted as having this breather. It's like this breather in the midst of Lent. But originally, it was basically that last gasp of joyance before the period of fasting began. And so we see in the liturgy just layers upon layers of not just symbolism, but also historical usage there, and also shifting interpretations. Okay, but after Laetare Sunday, in any case, the liturgy has a distinctive shift from really from Ash Wednesday through Laetare Sunday. The church has really been focused on for the faithful, and I'm talking in the liturgy. In popular piety, we consider all of Lent as being a focus on the Passion of Christ. Liturgical piety is different. Liturgical piety really isn't that concerned with the Passion of Christ during the first 4 weeks of Lent. That might sound as a shock. It might sound offensive to pious ears, to use the old expression, but that is obviously the case. If you read the masses and offices of the first 4 weeks, there's not that much attention given to the Passion of Christ. It is preparing the faithful to renew their baptismal vows. And we basically have an extensive catechism class on the Christian basics over the weeks. And it's especially preparing the catechumens to receive baptism. Certainly appropriate there. And during those 4 weeks, we have the 3 scrutinies. Nowadays, they are celebrated on the, I believe, second, third, and fourth Sundays of Holy Lent, and where there are special rubrics in the Mass and a special period to acknowledge the catechumens and their coming commitment to Christ. And there's also in the present Roman Missal an inclusion of the godparents in the canon, believe it or not. And so the scrutinies in the ancient church were, times of questioning and times of trying the catechumens, making sure they knew what they were committing to, and they knew their stuff in terms of the different prayers and so forth of the church. And these were formal ceremonies. Also, we would be greatly remiss to remember, especially in the early centuries, the fact that there were public penitents. That is to say, people who had been expelled from the church because of sins, and there were mechanisms in the church to reconcile them on Palm Sunday. And so nowadays, the discipline is a little bit different. We are just asked to make a private confession. But in the early centuries of the church, there were indeed public penitents. They formed a group. You basically go to confession, and the priest, if your sins were grave enough, would kind of sequester you and put off the absolution until you had done sufficient penance, maybe for several months, at which point, as a group, you would all be reconciled. And there were beautiful, beautiful ceremonials on sometime during Holy Week, depending on the time, to reconcile the penitents formally, with great usage made of the parable of the prodigal son. Okay, so that brings us to our first main part of the Triduum, having briefly covered everything through Holy Week. We, of course, come to Palm Sunday. We're not going to worry about that so much. It's not so appropriate, but we do want to consider that major time period. Now, formerly, you have Passion Tide, which consists of those 2 weeks. In the present books, it's absolutely the 6th week of Lent, or Holy Week, is Passion Tide. Palm Sunday is also known officially in the books as Passion Sunday. But you do have the 2 weeks. You have different allowances. Even in the new books in the breviary, you can use the Holy Week hymns and so forth. And what is absolute is that those last 2 weeks are focused on the Passion of Christ. Formerly, you would also have extensive reading of the Passion accounts in all 4 Gospels. Presently, in the lectionary, you have the Passion account of the year. So as of this recording, we are in year C. So we're looking, and we heard on Palm Sunday, the Passion according to Luke. Next year, year A, we're going to listen to Matthew. Year B, to Mark. And then, regardless of the age, whether you're using the present books or you're using the former books, East or West, everyone gets the Passion of John on Good Friday. So that has not changed one iota. So we see that. And indeed, as you move into the Holy Week and into Easter proper, and they do need to be seen as one giant liturgical symphonia. Everything from Septuagesima through the octave of Pentecost is one single song, one single concerto. Often we don't do that. We have this huge buildup. This, especially in the Latin Rite, because there's such a focus on the Passion of Christ. There's a huge buildup during Lent to the Triduum, and then we often forget that after Easter Sunday, that the celebration of Easter is just beginning, and it is, absolutely. You can see this in the rubrics and in the selections. It is absolutely doing us a great disservice to move on after Easter Sunday has come and gone, because the Easter season probably has more, forgive me for the pun, but has more Easter eggs and liturgical goodies than Lent has, believe it or not. And as outstanding as Lenten Bible selections are, and patristic selections, we have even more powerful ones during Easter. Easter is what we're building up to. And when I say Easter, I mean the 7 weeks of Easter. The 8 weeks, if you're going to hold out hope for that old Pentecost octave for coming back. This is the Shangri-La of the church years, the 7 weeks of Easter. In any case, we get ahead of ourselves. I did want to make a note of the books. Notice there's a shift. So after the 4th week of Lent, we move into the book of Hebrews. In the new books, in the breviary, we have everything from the whole Exodus saga through Moses' erection of the wilderness tabernacle. And then we do a hard cut to the book of Hebrews, where the author of Hebrews, traditionally thought of as St. Paul, is talking about Christ in the eternal tabernacle, the heavenly tabernacle, and the eternal priesthood of Christ, contrasted with the passing priesthood of Moses. So there's a deep, deep parallelism there. In the former books of the Old Breviary, you don't have the book of Hebrews so prominent, but you do have the book of Joshua. So that you have, obviously, Joshua is the English name for Jesus. And I'm not going to get into the history of why Jesus Christ is referred to as Jesus. And then you have an Anglo-Saxon named Joshua. But the point is, they have the same root name. And so you have the two Jesuses basically in Passiontide compared. The conquest of the Holy Land historically by Joshua, and then the conquest of the kingdom of Satan by Joshua. So again, the church's richness is just overflowing here. And that's why we want to get deeply involved in all the liturgical books as time will allow, because then we really soak in the profundity of the liturgy. We really become spiritually constipated when we obsess about one form of the Catholic Church, East or West or past or present. A lot of us are robbing ourselves by becoming anal retentive about this or that. The Latin Rite, I'm afraid, has become, especially in these United States, which is a very Protestant country, has become absolutely constipated with liturgical food fights and so forth. Those are very mixed metaphors, aren't they? Liturgical constipation and liturgical food fights. But I think they're both appropriate, or rather they're both inappropriate, because we're, every post on Angel Queen or Fish Eaters or God Help Us Reddit, every post where we're pissing on the new liturgy or the old liturgy or whatever, we're wasting time to realize how deep the church's overall liturgy is. And so we see that. Who's right? Who's right? Is it better to have the book of Hebrews or the book of Joshua? I don't know, and I don't care. I get them both. That's liturgical maturity. That's Christian maturity. Some other changes, of course, you're going to see a lot more of St. John, regardless of the year of the lectionary. You're going to see a lot more of St. John, not only in the Triduum, but throughout Eastertide. Eastertide really spends that time breaking out what we've called since the 16th century, the high priestly prayer of Christ on Holy Thursday, that extensive meditation where Christ is speaking to the Father. That's broken down day by day by day by day during Easter time until basically the Ascension, when there's a similar shift in books, but that's for another recording. The point is, St. John features very prominently during Passiontide and the Triduum into Easter itself. Obviously, St. John being, without a doubt, the most sublime and the most spiritual and the most poetic of the Gospel authors. I've left this illustration of the garden here because we would be remiss, again, we're talking about garden to garden, we would indeed be remiss to forget that going back to Septuagesima, we read in the breviary the opening words of the Bible, famously, in the beginning. And talking about St. John, how does St. John begin his gospel? In the beginning. That's not for nothing. We have the creation of the world and the recreation of the world in the Paschal mystery. The world is completely changed. The entirety of creation is completely changed by the Paschal mystery, the suffering, death, and resurrection of Christ on the cross. And we see that liturgically in the beginning of Lent, with in the beginning, and then St. John's focus now in Passiontide and the Triduum in the beginning with his gospel. That's not for nothing. I mean, look at the Old Testament church. Look at Old Testament fleshly Israel. When was their day of prayer? It was the Sabbath. It was Saturday. It was the seventh day when creation was finished. The reason New Testament Israel celebrates Sunday as its day of rest and has abrogated the Sabbath is because the world has been recreated by Christ. Everything has been changed after the Paschal mystery, and so it's only appropriate that we celebrate the true recreation of the world, the true creation of the world, on Sunday, the day of resurrection. Not just the resurrection of Jesus, but the resurrection of all creation and the sanctification, potentially, of all of creation. Not just men, by the way. St. Paul is very clear that all of creation groans, and indeed elsewhere, that all of creation is saved by Christ, right? That's why Christ himself says at the ascension, go and preach to all creation. It doesn't say go and preach to all people. It says to all creation, all the dirt, all the soil, all the water, all the birds and plants and so forth. Everyone needs to hear, and everything needs to hear the message of redemption. There's all sorts of eccentric saints that have caught on to that reality. And indeed, the church itself has caught on to that reality, which is why, especially during the Triduum, we see such physicality. Not just the physicality we see ordinarily in worship, the bowing and the kneeling and so forth, but bread and oil and wine and smoke and light and darkness, and all of these things are used in the liturgy because all of them have been sanctified by the Paschal mystery. Anyway, getting into Holy Thursday. All of this is very, very necessary legwork to the topic at hand. Getting into Holy Thursday. We have so much going on that basically the church has had to break it down into different things. And so the main focus of Holy Thursday and the main ceremony of Holy Thursday, of course, consists of the mandatum. But really there's, that is to say, the new commandment that Christ, the new lawgiver, gives. And I'll change the image here. You must forgive me. Sometimes I forget to change the image appropriately. So that is the new commandment, love one another as I have loved you. But that's not all. I mean, that's the main focus of Holy Thursday. But we get ahead of ourselves, the institution of the priesthood. So let me pull up some appropriate images here before we move ahead too much. Now, in terms of the chronology of Holy Thursday, we have Tenebrae, and so I should probably spend some minutes on that, because this ceremonial will also be featured in Good Friday and Holy Saturday. So the word itself, of course, is Latin, and it means darkness. It's just an adjective meaning darkness. And let me just open up this here. Okay. Now, properly speaking, the Roman Rite, and presently speaking, the Roman Rite does not have a Tenebrae service. At one point, it was before the mid-20th century, and the Second Vatican Council, it did, and it was regulated as a proper service in the rubrics. That is no longer the case, and I should hope in centuries to come, along with Septuagesima and the Ember Days and the Pentecost octave, that we'll see a proper restoration of Tenebrae. That being said, in the rubrics of the Liturgia Ararum, for any day of the year, there are provisions made to combine the office of readings, formerly matins, and lauds together. So basically, that's what Tenebrae always has been. And so it's pretty easy peasy to come up with a Tenebrae service. You just have to take advantage of the rubrics as they exist on every other day of the year, and you can gussy it up with the candelabra, the hearse, as it's called, the 15 candle contraption there. And as the different psalms and prophecies are read appropriate to Holy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, the different candles are extinguished by the acolyte. At different times in church history, the candles would have different colors to them. and different symbolic meanings and different meanings given to the number of candles and so forth. Also, depending on the century, sometimes Tenebrae would be done the evening before, and in the 20th century, one of the consistent shifts that you see is for any day of the year to say the office properly at its proper time. So for much of the medieval and early modern period, Tenebrae was said actually the evening of Holy Wednesday for Thursday, and it would be said the evening prior. I'm going to trip over the days of the week if I lay it out there, but it was done the evening before. And in fact, there was indeed for much of the medieval and early modern period a great confusion of time periods, meaning by the 20th century, you had the offices and liturgies of the church completely out of whack with the historical times that they took place. So you would be saying the morning offices the night before, you'd be saying the Holy Thursday Maundy Mass in the middle of the day, or the Easter, and as Pius Parsh, will say Dom Parsh, although he wasn't an abbot, so he wasn't a Dom. But as Pius Parsh points out in the Church's Year of Grace, the most discordant, he says, example of this was indeed saying the Easter Vigil during noon on Holy Saturday. And a lot of that, in reality, historically, had to do with fasting. These same time periods, the medieval and early modern periods, it was almost like the Muslims. You couldn't break your fast, especially the clergy and the religious, until Vespers. However, there's nothing to stop Vespers from being said earlier in the day. So there was the custom. You'll even see this on the old 55 or die people, as one of the recent priests called them. That subsection within the Latin Rite, that subsection within the so-called traditional Catholics who insist on the 55 books. The custom they maintain of having dinner in the middle of the afternoon, because what was happening for such a long stretch of centuries is that Vespers was being said, in the early afternoon, like 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then people would break their fast. Basically have a late lunch. And so that playing around with fasting, and maybe too much of a focus on the letter of the law, that more than anything explains why the ceremonial of the Latin Rite was so out of whack for so long. Now, it is the Catholic Church, and so what ends up happening is that people begin to start seeing symbolical meanings in this. And so, why are we saying the morning offices at nighttime? And why are we saying the Easter Vigil in the middle of the day? Aha! It must be because there's an intended symbolic meaning to that. And so as I'm pulling up one of my favorite paintings, what was interpreted in this discordance was the fact, look, Holy Week is the time when the devil is strongest and apparently won over Christ. Therefore, everything's turned upside down, even the liturgy, which is actually a pretty cool interpretation. I'm not going to lie, but it is kind of reading into a reality, something that wasn't initially there. That's not a very good resolution painting. Let me just pull this one up. This is The Harrowing of Hell by Hieronymus Bosch. So yeah, there's so much going on in Holy Thursday. So you have in the beginning, you have the office of Tenebrae in the morning presently. And like I say, we've done it here in New Milford for years and years and years. We've had a Tenebrae service from the Liturgy of the Hours, and it's very well received. So look, this is why the times are off. Hell is in charge until Christ breaks down the doors of hell and everything returns to normal on Easter. Anyway, back to Holy Thursday. So you have Tenebrae in the morning and the offices associated there too. And of course the the focus in terms of the Paschal mystery is the betrayal of Christ. But we also have the mandatum, and of course, ideally, in the diocese of the cathedrals, later on in the morning, you will have the Chrism Mass. And this is where the oils for the year are blessed by the bishop. Chrism Mass. In addition to the oils, the oil of catechumens and the oil of anointing of the sick for extreme unction, and I forget what the third one is, to be honest with you. Often out of olive oil, and then if you're really hard up, if the priest is really hard up during the year and he's running out, he can add some oil, but less than 50%, and then just keep repeating that, and the blessing carries over. In any case, you have, yes, the Chrism Mass, the blessing of the oils, where the priest will all join the bishop. There's so much even in the Chrism Mass. Beyond just the oils, you have all of the priests and deacons in the diocese are asked to join in the Mass, to join with their bishop in the Mass. This is a symbol of unity, a symbol of the unity of the presbyterate in the diocese. So all of the clergy are asked to pray and to concelebrate this Mass with the bishop. If your clergy are not doing that, one may have to ask, are they in union with the church, with the bishop? I'm afraid that this has become quite a sticking point for people who believe they're very devoted to the Catholic faith. And I won't say anything more than that, except to say that if you, priest, are not praying with your bishop on Holy Thursday in the cathedral, concelebrating that Mass, there is a problem there. Additionally, one of the foci of Holy Thursday is the institution of the priesthood. And so it is at this Chrism Mass that not only will the presbyterate concelebrate the Mass with their bishop, but also the priest will renew their vows. Just like married couples have vows, priests have vows, and this is when every year, it's very special, the priest will all together renew their vows, diocese by diocese. Now, practically, sometimes the Chrism Mass is earlier in the week. I know that's been the case for the past few years here in the Archdiocese of Hartford, and that will change. But the reality of the liturgical significance remains. So here we are on Holy Thursday. We've gotten through Tenebrae, which might take an hour and a half, 2 hours to chant, and then we have a Chrism Mass. You can bet your bippy another hour and a half there. And then you have the regular offices of the day. Properly speaking, the Triduum has not begun. The Triduum will not begin mid-afternoon prayer on Holy Thursday. Is really the last stop for Lent. And then we move into the Mandatum Mass, and so this is also a ceremonial filled with huge amounts of symbolism. The main foci, even from the word mandatum means commandment, is the giving of the singular commandment of the new covenant: love one another as I have loved you. It has certain remarkable features, of which the foot washing of the 12 men is the most appropriate. Of course, I can't find what I want. When I want, story of my life. Okay, we can say goodbye to the Chrism Mass. Bye, Chrism Mass. But so anyway, we'll just stick with this. You have the washing of the feet, again, showing the humility of Christ, servant leadership, all of this good stuff. And then, of course, Christ will go out after singing a hymn down to the Kidron Valley and to spend the night in the Garden of Gethsemane, following the same path that David took when he was overthrown by bravery from the king's cycle, right? Christ follows the exact same route to the Kidron Valley. And of course, if you remember from the book of Kings, the sorrowful journey that David had to make when he realizes his own son has betrayed him. He has to go down this pathway with people throwing garbage at him and making fun of him. Well, again, we have an obvious parallel to the new David, or the fulfillment of the Davidic promise, as Christ literally follows the same path of humiliation out of Jerusalem to the Garden of Gethsemane, except he's not going to be betrayed by his son, but rather by Judas. And of course, we consider that we have the arrest of Jesus. And so getting back to the liturgy, following the Mahdi Mass, we immediately have the stripping of the altars. Now we have entered indeed into the Triduum. Everything that's about to unfold, including the Mahdi Mass, is one single ceremony. So the Triduum is chronologically 3 days, and yet it is liturgically 1 day. The Paschal Mystery are 3 events: the suffering, death, and resurrection of Christ, and yet they are one singular theological reality. Likewise, the ceremonial of the Maundy Thursday Mass, the liturgy of the pre-sanctified on the afternoon of Good Friday, and the Easter Vigil are considered, I hope I'm being heard very clearly here, one single ceremony. They are one single ceremony. And the way you know that is you begin the Maundy Mass with the traditional, typical opening of Holy Mass. The Maundy Mass does not have a proper conclusion. It abruptly moves right in. There's no closing blessing because it's not over. It's the ceremony is continuing. So you move right into the stripping of the altars and a movement of the whole congregation to the altar of repose. Then the next day, for the Good Friday Mass, there is no proper opening. The priest goes into the church and he prostrates himself on the altar, and the ceremony proceeds. And then there's the not really a proper dismissal. It just ends after the post communion. And then for the vigil, you move right into the Lucenarium and the blessing of the Paschal fire. And then at the very end of the Easter Vigil, you have the proper blessing, as you would at the close of any Mass. So the purpose, you can even see it rubrically, the purpose is to point out we're dealing with a single theological reality of the Paschal mystery. And so in the liturgy, that's why you don't have the traditional openings and closings of the ceremonies. You have one opening on Holy Thursday, the typical opening of Mass, and you have one closing ceremony at the end of the Easter Vigil, because it is one single thing. What happens in between are just breaks. And if you're familiar with the Oriental liturgies, you'll be familiar with that there are in their rubrics, times where they take a lunch break, so to speak, because those ceremonies are much longer, but they are one ceremony. All right. So you have the stripping of the altar, and indeed the singing of Psalm 22, and then the procession to the altar of repose, often singing the Pange Lingua. And then we move into Good Friday. And we'll come up with an appropriate piece of artwork here. Obviously, the focus of Good Friday is on the death of Christ. But that doesn't mean liturgy. That doesn't mean we don't have some other aspects here. So part of that is Tenebrae, right? Once again, we begin the morning with Tenebrae, the office of readings and matins, back to back. Very moving ceremony. If ever you get to it, come out here up. And of course, the ceremonial looks pretty much the same, except the texts are appropriate to the Passion of Christ. And then you don't really have much going on liturgically until the mid-afternoon. Often you'll have Stations of the Cross, or you'll have different devotions. A lot of people don't. Whatever, there are all sorts of pious devotions, but liturgically speaking, you have after Tenebrae, very windy outside just now, very, very windy. You have mid-morning prayer, you have Sext, and then you have Non. I should point out that on Holy Thursday and Good Friday, one does not say you can double check the rubrics, but variously Vespers and Compline are not to be said if one attends the main ceremony. So if you go to the Maundy Thursday ceremony, you do not say Vespers that night. Or if you go to the Good Friday ceremony, you do not say Vespers that night. If you go to the Easter Vigil, you do not say Compline. That's my memory of the rubrics. So they're replaced. In any case, especially in the Old Liturgy, and one of the great Easter eggs of the Old Liturgy is that during the Triduum, the offices are extremely stripped down, and they're very solemn. So on Good Friday, you have basically just the Psalms and a collect. There's no hymn. There's no traditional Deus in Aiutorium. The Gloria Patri is gone. The reading, the capitulum is gone. It's just the Psalms and the collect. And in fact, that's the starkness of the Good Friday office is very, very attention grabbing, especially if you're in the habit of saying the office for the rest of the year. It's very solemn and sober and bare bones, as is the Mass of the Pre-Sanctified. And so you see in this image here, the priests in the present books will be wearing the red garments, and the altar is altogether stripped. There is no consecration. The main feature, actually, there are several main features of the Mass, the Pre-Sanctified. We have the Gospel of St. John already alluded to. Presented in almost a passion play format with the choir and different readers taking the different parts and the congregation taking the different parts as the priest sings through the gospel, very extensive gospel. And then you have the adoration of the cross would be the other main feature of the Mass, the Pre-Sanctified. That is the kissing of the cross. And that is an incorporation from the Byzantine liturgy, in fact. And I believe originally that was something that came out of the Jerusalem church. That was originally a custom of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and it extended to the larger Byzantine Rite, and it was eventually adopted by the Latin Rite. So this is where the faithful, just like communion or just and kiss a crucifix. And that's the adoration of the cross. The priest will, or the deacon will hold up the cross at the beginning at 3 different points in the sanctuary, and more proclaim the crucifixion of Christ, and then the faithful will line up. So in the old days, you would separate the men from the women. And so there were various reasons for that, including acoustical. You have the beautiful singing of the hymns of the Hagiotheos. I should also say and I'll read this directly here, on the Triduum, especially Good Friday and Holy Saturday, there is no Blessed Sacrament in the tabernacle. And so I wanted to read this here. This is from the General Instruction of the Roman Missal. And they point out this little detail, which you would be well to remember. And that is, on genuflections and bows, where do I want this? I just had it. Here we go. Yep. So this is from paragraph 274. A genuflection made by bending the right knee to the ground signifies adoration, and therefore is reserved for the most blessed sacrament, as well as for the Holy Cross, from the solemn adoration during the liturgical celebration on Good Friday until the beginning of the Easter Vigil. So from Good Friday and Holy Saturday, you genuflect not to the tabernacle. There's nothing to genuflect there too. You genuflect to the cross on those 2 days. So just a little bit of liturgical etiquette there. Traditionally, if you're in a church for the rest of the year and there's no Blessed Sacrament, you just bow to the altar. But here you genuflect towards the cross. And indeed, during the Mass of the Pre-Sanctified, you indeed have the opportunity to kiss the crucifix, honoring the sacrifice of Christ. And then, of course, the other notable aspect is the name of the ceremony, the Mass of the Pre-Sanctified. And so this is also a very jarring thing in the Latin Rite at present, the fact that there is no consecration. There is communion, and those hosts were consecrated the previous night at the Maundy Thursday Mass, but there is no actual consecration. And whilst that is a very dramatic and notable aspect of the Latin liturgy, it's not completely unheard of in the East. It's actually much, forget about not completely unheard of, it's much, much more common to have what are called a-liturgical days or non-liturgical days. And in different usages in the Western Rite, that was also the case at different points, such as the Ambrosian Rite, for instance. There were many, many more a-liturgical days, and in the early church there were a-liturgical days, that is to say days with no consecration. So again, that's just a kind of historical point. I think the fact that there's just one a-liturgical day, Good Friday, in the Latin Rite certainly makes it stick in the memory and adds to the dramatic aspect of the day. All right. So after that, there is no Vespers if you attend the ceremonial, and then everyone leaves the church in quiet. And then there is Compline that night, just taken from Sunday. So again, a very stripped down, just a Confiteor and some psalms and a closing prayer and things. Very, very basic. Again, showing the starkness of the day. All right, and then we move into Holy Saturday, and here this image is most appropriate. Again, Hieronymus Bosch's harrowing of hell. You see all the chaos here in this early modern painting, but don't forget to see Christ here busting down the doors of hell. And so, just want to double check the tech here, grand, and back online here. So yeah, here's Hieronymus Bosch, and we're looking as we move towards Holy Saturday. Before we get to this great scene, we are given a day of tremendous mourning. And in fact, I think the image we want here is of the Pieta, one of the great, maybe the greatest statue ever made. Arguably, I think in the 1970s, the subject of a hammer attack. Some insane man. This happens more than you would imagine. Insane people try to attack works of art in different ways. There, it's quite remarkable. And I think they knocked off the nose of the Virgin at that time. It's since been restored. This obviously doesn't do any justice to this statue. In fact, this is such a disservice. I'm going to see if I can. Well, here, let's see what comes up. Anyway, let's not get ahead of ourselves to the Easter Vigil. We don't want to rob ourselves. This is much better, by the way. Still not very good, though, but it's better than that grainy thing we just had. We don't want to rob ourselves of the solemnity of Holy Saturday. We are in, and the church is in, the greatest mourning. This is the time when Christ has been completely abandoned by all except really the Virgin Mary and St. John, who never lost hope in Christ and hope in the ultimate victory of Christ. Everyone else flaked out. And so this is the time, these 40 hours of Christ's death, that the church is in the deepest, blackest mourning. And we don't want to, speedboat over this. I know practically a lot of us are getting ready for our Easter dinners and shopping and all of this stuff, getting haircuts as I shall on Holy Saturday. But we don't want to rob ourselves of the theme. It's one of the most powerful days of the Latin year in the liturgy. In fact, it's also the birthday of Apocatastasis's Holy Saturday, not for nothing. In any case, we see that again. We have Tenebrae in the morning. The readings are calibrated to the sorrows of the day, and indeed, in the present liturgy of the hours, I believe, and many others have said as much, that we have certainly one of the greatest selections, maybe the greatest patristic selection of the entire year, from an unknown author of the 2nd century. And it's this very dramatic dialogue between the old Adam and the new Adam. Whether or not you can make it to Tenebrae, whether or not you have any interest in the divine office, I would heavily encourage you to make it your custom to read this sermon every year along with the church. And it's the second lesson in the Liturgy of the Hours, an ancient homily on Holy Saturday. The Lord descends into hell. I will not read the whole thing, but it is most moving. I'll just read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs. Something strange is happening, we read on Holy Saturday. There is a great silence on earth today, a great silence and stillness. The whole earth keeps silence because the King is asleep. The earth trembled and is still because God has fallen asleep in the flesh, and he has raised up all who have slept ever since the world began. God has died in the flesh, and hell trembles with fear. He has gone to search for our first parent, as for a lost sheep, greatly desiring to visit those who live in darkness and the shadow of death. He has gone to free from sorrow the captives Adam and Eve, he who is both God and the son of Eve. And it goes on. It's a most moving imagined dialogue between Adam and Christ. And, this painting by Hieronymus Bosch is rather stark. My goodness gracious. Always the last tab you want. I need to clear up the tabs here. There we go. But, we have more traditional iconography of what's called, indeed, the harrowing of hell, or, the descent into hell, as we say in the Western liturgy. And of course, the hell that Christ goes into during those 40 hours is not the hell of the damned, as the church fathers are quick to point out, but rather the hell of the just, or the limbo of the just. That is to say, that holding pen of all the virtuous from Adam until Christ. All the virtuous friends of God who were waiting for Christ to open the doors of heaven, they were in this so-called hell or limbo of the fathers. This is to be absolutely distinct and distinguished from the limbo, or rather the hell of the damned, and for that matter, the theological speculation of the limbo of the infants. So just to be very clear, the hell of the damned and the hell or limbo of the fathers are dogmatic, doctrinal, obligatory teachings of the church. The hell of the limbo of the infants, that is a theological speculation, which one is free to have various thoughts on and various conclusions on. The church has not defined the limbo of the infants in the absolute way that the hell of the damned and the limbo of the fathers has been laid out. So I want to make that distinction there. In any case, obviously great fodder for artists and homilists over the years. Whilst the church mourns Christ dead on earth, Christ is reaving. This is also, to use the old English expression, reaving, or gathering in the harvest of souls. And a word here is very important. The liturgy is assuming that we know this. St. Paul is assuming we know this. There's a lot of Greco-Roman culture in the liturgy, and this is a huge, huge topic that's largely been forgotten by modern Christians, and that is the fact that Christ was born in the Roman Empire, and a lot of church fathers and the liturgy itself sees in that a providential role of ancient Rome. It's not just the story of the Hebrews, but rather the story of the Romans and the Greeks as well. And I bring that up because the liturgy is assuming we know something about Roman culture, and that those have to do with conquerors. In Roman culture, the Senate historically had 3 awards for a conquering general. Those were the ovation, basically for a single victory. The Senate would give you a lamb, and you would sacrifice the sheep, the ovis, at the temple of Mars. That's the ovation, right? Don't we not have a standing ovation today, right? It's a little honor. And then the two very, very important ones that I think add a great depth of meaning to our appreciation of the Paschal mystery and the liturgy is the triumph. If you conquered a nation, I mean, you conquered Gaul, you conquered Mesopotamia, which actually never was conquered, but at least it had times when the Romans could pretend as much, or you conquered Asia, you conquered, Mithridates. You made a major conquest. You killed, you conquered the Carthaginians. The Roman Senate would vote you a triumph. A triumph wasn't an ovation. A triumph was a major parade. The soldiers laid down their weapons and put on the wreaths of victory. The enemy was paraded naked in basic garments, completely disarmed. The booty of the enemy was piled high in wagons, the booty that you had conquered. The enemy general or chieftain, would be in chains, would be in a dog kennel, maybe on a cart, right? The sign of the humiliation of your enemy. You have completely dominated your enemy. And so after your victorious troops march by, you have the defeated enemy. And then you have, and you can read the specifics of the triumph yourself. I'm just giving you a nutshell version. After that, you have the triumphant general with his face painted red like Mars. And then in the good old days of the Republic, you would you sell the conquered slaves or the conquered soldiers as slaves, and then kill. You would sacrifice. Execute, if you like, the enemy chieftain. I mean, that's why you have people like Vercingetorix and Cleopatra and things killing themselves before they were captured because they didn't want to be taken in this humiliating way on a triumph. But the point is, St. Paul refers to the triumph of Christ. And he's making, in the Paschal mystery, what Christ does in Calvary, he's making a very conscious allusion to the Roman triumph. If you don't know what the Roman triumph is and the pomp and circumstance and the total domination over the enemy that the triumph indicated, you're not going to understand the power of St. Paul's language. Likewise, higher than the triumph was something that the Senate only awarded twice in the 3,000-year history of Rome. No, that's too. No, wait, well, 500 BC to 2,000-year history of Rome. Let's say, east and west, right? But between the oath of Horatius all the way to the fall of Constantinople in 1453. That's 2,000 years, right? The Senate only rewarded two of these, and these were the spolia optima. These were the highest honors imaginable in Rome, and this is where a general, your general, defeated in single combat the enemy general, and took his armor, just like in the Iliad. You strip your enemy butt naked and you put on your enemy's armor and you strut off the battlefield. That allusion, which finds itself often in monastic literature as to what is it the monk is doing. The monk is doing single combat with the devil. That imagery is also very profound on Holy Saturday, both in the liturgy and just in the meditations on those mysteries. Let's just see here. Not that we want to be too reliant on Google. For our history, but briefly, let's see what comes up. The spolia opima were the armor, arms, and other effects that an ancient Roman general stripped from the body of an opposing commander slain in single combat. Right, so this was the highest victory you could have. And that language indeed is used very extensively in the liturgy of Holy Saturday. So you have tenebrae, you have the offices. They continue to be very stripped down for after tenebrae, mid-morning, midday, and mid-afternoon prayer. And then in the present books, There is Vespers of Holy Saturday, but Compline is optional for the it's not optional. If you go to the vigil, you do not say Compline. Okay, I'll get an appropriate image for Holy Saturday, and we'll bring our presentation to a nice holy conclusion. So the Easter Vigil begins with what's called the Lucinarium. And this is a contribution of the Celtic Church. And if you read Pius Parsh's book, which you can freely access on our site and download, The Church's Year of Grace, he gets into this. The Paschal candle is blessed in this fire. And this is a custom, very Druidic, I suppose, of having this outdoor fire to begin the Easter Vigil ceremony. And so you have the blessing of the Paschal candle. You can read the specifics of the ceremonial, the incense grains that are inserted, and the year, the Alpha and the Omega. What's really, front and center, if you know to look for it, is this idea of Christ recreating the world. And you see that indeed with the use of the Alpha and Omega Greek letters on the candle, and the different aspects here. Ideally, the Paschal candle is not lit with a lighter, a Bic lighter, which I've seen before, God help us, but is rather struck from flint. So it's a natural fire. I guess you want to be a real Jew about it. You can say that a Bic lighter is a natural fire because it does use flint and steel. But there is something very lame. I'm going to say that. I will put my opinions on my sleeve here. There is something very lame about watching a Paschal candle being lit with like a neon orange, extended Bic lighter, which I have seen. Please just stick with an old piece of flint and do it the old-fashioned way. If you have to use a lighter, do it do it behind closed doors. In any case, the candle is inserted here with appropriate prayers. The Easter candle will be a very prominent feature for the next 7 to 8 weeks. 8 weeks, of course, including that Pentecost vigil, which will someday be restored. And actually, well, hold on, I take that back. The Paschal candle will be lit from the Easter Vigil until the Vigil of the Ascension, and it represents the unique presence, the post-resurrection appearances and presence of Christ. In the present liturgical books of the Latin Rite, the Paschal candle is to be lit at every baptism and is also to be, for baptismal symbology, present at funeral masses, at requiem masses. Just like the baby has a baptismal robe, or indeed the man who is baptized has a baptismal robe. Likewise, the coffin, at the Christian funeral will symbolize the baptismal robe. And likewise, we have that similar imagery, the Paschal candle, the baptismal candle. Okay, remember, one of the great foci of the Easter Vigil is also the baptism of catechumens and the renewal of baptismal vows. So we see that present here. After the blessing of the Paschal fire and the Paschal candle, the candle is brought in by the deacon. The church is completely dark. Everyone has unlit candles, and hopefully not too many stubbed toes and bumps into other people in the dark. People have found their way back to the pews, and this is where the ushers, get their are worth their salt or not. This is a stress test for ushers to see if they can get everyone back to their proper seats in the dark. But anyhow, the deacon will hold the candle, and just like during Good Friday, he up the cross times, behold the salvation of the world. Likewise, now the deacon will hold up the Lucinarium and sing thrice the light of Christ, the Lumen Christi, and then we'll proceed in the present books with the Exultant, this most outstanding hymn of the Latin Church. I encourage everyone to review a recording of the Exultant. At which point we'll begin the prophecies or the lessons, depending on the books and so forth. And so you have, still seeing, Yeah, so here's a congregation, very reminiscent of Candlemas, for instance. All these candles. But yeah, after the exultant, you have the reading of the different lessons. In the medieval times, in monasteries and things, you would have 12 lessons. Then after the 55 reforms, you had 4 lessons, pretty lame. And then actually one of the areas where the we'll say the Vatican II books improve on the with the 55 the 62 books is in the restoration of the lessons. So I'm going to just take a look here. I think there are 9 lessons, maybe they're back to 12, but you only have to read, you have some options. So I think like you have to read 4, but you can read 12. So there's some variation there depending on the on the congregation and its pastoral needs. But I do want the full number of lessons there, and they all are followed by a psalm. So this is a true vigil. And there are 7 readings from the Old Testament and 2 from the New. That's 9, which has a certain significance in Christian numerology. 9 choirs of angels, right? And then there's some options as to what ones are read. But this is a vigil. At no point now has Mass actually begun. This is all just preparing. This is an area where the Eastern rites, and especially I would say the Oriental Orthodox, have not budged, and that is on the true vigil. If you watch the Orthodox liturgies and even the Eastern Catholic liturgies, those things go on for a long time. I saw a vigil for the Assumption that went on for 15 hours on YouTube. 15 hours before the liturgy, which was another 4 hours, began. So they're not playing here. So so don't get grouchy that you have to listen to 4 lessons for 20 minutes, whatever. All right, then following that, you have the reading of the gospel followed by a homily. This is all the ceremonial for the Easter Vigil, the mother of all vigils, the mother of all celebrations. If you can get to it, get to it. Then you have the celebration, the baptism of the candidates. I would be completely remiss. We've talked about this. We've named this from garden to garden. There's a huge symbology of nudity here. This might shock North American 501c3 Christians, but in the early church, baptism, regardless of age, was done nude, and that was not for nothing. That was not for nothing. And in the ancient Easter Sunday Vigil, or rather, Easter Sunday Vigil, the catechumens were naked for a fair amount of the ceremonial. And this is attested to by 4 church fathers on 3 different continents. And that symbology also enters into, especially Eastern hymnody, the bipolarity of nudity in the liturgy, and also clothing, and the baptismal robe and so forth. So it's something I bring to one's attention here. That's no longer the case, as much as I might I might advocate. I interviewed years ago Jim Cunningham, who wrote a whole book here on naturism, on nudism, called Nudity in Christianity, where he has all the citations about this feature. And this was a feature that went on probably to the 9th century. So this was not a passing fad. And in the Eastern liturgies, the baby is still baptized nude. So that symbolism is maintained. But I remember asking poor Jim Cunningham, Lord have mercy on him, about restoring this aspect. He very, very sardonically replied, well, nobody wants to be baptized anyway. So it's kind of a waste of time to even talk about such a thing. But I may hold out hope. Anyhow, I'll behave myself. After the baptism of the catechumens, we have the litany of the saints, and depending on if you go to the present Mass or the so-called traditional Mass, that litany is going to be longer or shorter. But in any case, it concludes with the baptismal blessing of the waters. And here is very, very important to know. Again, we're talking garden to garden. Where's my Adam and Eve? Hey, there they are. Garden to garden. Remember how I said that Moses begins Genesis by saying in the beginning, and St. John begins his gospel in the beginning because Christ recreates the created world, the fallen world? Well, there is an aspect here which is absolutely worth noticing, and I think it's often overlooked, and that is the blessing of the Easter water at the vigil. Let's take a look here. There is a ceremonial indeed involving the candle. We can see it here in this image. I mean, there's so much symbology going on here. The candle represents Christ, and water for the Hebrews is always bad news. Bodies of water never are good in the Bible. So when the Israelites crossed through the Red Sea, water symbolizes chaos, basically, and lawlessness. And so when the Hebrews crossed through the Red Sea, that's showing the dominance of God over chaos. When Jesus walks on water, it's a very similar symbology. And likewise, when the Paschal candle, Christ coming out, the candle represents Christ. Coming out of the water represents, just like in baptism, triumphing over chaos and lawlessness. Water, bodies of water, are always bad news bearers in Christian symbology, and indeed in Hebrew symbology as well. So when the church, for instance, blesses water for holy water, it's showing the dominance of good over evil. And what I wanted to bring to your attention is in this section of the Easter liturgy, the priest will breathe on the water. Don't miss that detail. The priest will breathe on the water. And this, for those of you who read your Bible, should automatically bring up Genesis chapter 1, where God's Spirit hovered over the water. Right? When God created the world, God's Spirit hovered over the Spirit, the Ruha, we say in Arabic, and I understand that's the same word in Hebrew, largely because Hebrew, what we call Hebrew, is ripped off from German and Arabic. So modern Hebrew, which a lot of dear people spend a lot of time and money trying to master, is not the language that Moses spoke. But one of the things you'll notice is people who start studying Hebrew, they're like, oh my goodness, this is so close to the Arabic. Yeah, that's because they stole all the Arabic words and just put it into Yiddish characters. I'm going to bite my tongue on that point. The point is, ruah, which is an Arabic word for spirit, and it enters into modern Hebrew and modern Hebrew Bibles. It does have that. You have to breathe out to say ruah, ruah. There is something cool about that. And so God's Spirit, even in Latin, spirare, to breathe, spirit, the breath of God, the priest breathes over the water, symbolizing the recreation of everything in the Paschal mystery. So notice that you and I rob ourselves to pass over these details. All right, following the blessing of the baptismal waters, we have the renewal of baptismal promises by everyone, and then the clothing of the catechumens with the baptismal garment. As I mentioned formerly, in the first millennium, you had the catechumens up until now were butt naked. At this point, they had been baptized, and actually, there would be a separate bath they would take at this point because they were covered head to toe with oil. And then, regardless of nudity and second baths, you do have in the present books the clothing with the baptismal garment at this point. And this garment traditionally would be white, alba. And so that's why, those of you who go to the Latin Mass, one of the names for the Sunday after Easter Sunday is Dominica in Albis, because the candidates, now Christians, would wear the white baptismal garment the entire week. And then on Dominica in Albis, they would return the white baptismal garments to the church wardrobe, for the next year, for the next batch of catechumens. So obviously the symbolism of the garment the white garment is, new life in Christ. And it's pretty obvious symbolism, right? New life, new beginnings, and the new Christians are given a lighted candle, just like babies have their baptismal candle, 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 candle. Obviously, we see that. Okay, so then you have the renewal of baptismal promises and the profession of faith by all of the faithful, whether they've just been baptized or they have been baptized for many years. Everyone renews their vows. Okay. If anyone needs to be confirmed at this point, the confirmation happens, and then we move into Mass proper. Everything up until now has just been the vigil. So this is a true vigil. It is, as St. Augustine says, the mother of all vigils. And we move into the offertory, and then everything proceeds as normal, with the exception that there is a proper solemn blessing at the end. Now that these days of the Lord's Passion have drawn to a close, may you who celebrate with gladness the Paschal Feast come with Christ's help and exulting spirit to those feasts that are celebrated in eternal joy. And then notice that the deacon will, for the next week, will have, he will say, rather the priest will say, "Go in peace, alleluia, alleluia, thanks be to God, alleluia, alleluia." Now, hold on. I'm getting nerdy here with my rubrics, but to dismiss the people, the deacon, or if there is no deacon, the priest. So yeah, ideally the deacon will say, "Go in peace, alleluia, alleluia, thanks be to God, alleluia, alleluia." And of course, we see obviously the major prominence of the alleluia at this point, and that will continue. Especially for the vigil, especially for the octave, those 8 days celebrated as one single day that have now begun, right? The octave is one single day of grace, even though it is 7 chronological days. Liturgically, it is one single day: Easter, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and the following Sunday are one day liturgically. And we see that there is no, oh my goodness gracious. I wanted an Easter icon. I should have known better. Oh, hell, heaven help us. But there is nothing like the Easter octave. It is quite truly a unique week. Everything's proper. There are things in it that are not repeated any other time during the year. And we'll see if we can get this icon up. And part of that is the heavy use of alleluia, including in the divine office, uniquely done for the rest of the year. So we have that. There are certain religious orders where, they'll have the alleluia like 25 times in a row. That's the antiphon. And so there's a beautiful reading that you'll often see quoted at this time of year about the Alleluia is our victory song. And St. Augustine goes on about, the plowman will sing it at his plow and the rowers will row to it, and mothers will rock their babies to the Alleluia. So it is the great victory cry of the church. I think Augustine says we are Easter men, and our song is Alleluia. He has a sermon where all of these points are made. Now, what are the cool points, especially in the old liturgy, the 62 or 55 liturgies, that we see is that there's a great lengthening of prayers during Passiontide, and then a great reduction in the length of prayers during Easter. And I think there's something very human about that. In the present books of the Roman liturgy, the Roman Missal and the Liturgy of the Hours, things are super streamlined. They're especially in the Breviary, is really no alteration in length. Although for reasons that are not appropriate to this presentation, there is an optional vigil for feast days and Sundays. That certain religious orders petitioned desperately the Vatican to include, because their offices were so short, which was very nice for the secular clergy who had been complaining prior to Vatican II that the office was too long. Well, you had the opposite problem. So there's some provisions there, but by and large, the office is very cookie cutter, which is not a bad thing typically. But I will say that's one of the enjoyable features of the old liturgy is the Mass readings and the breviary readings are super long. And then after Easter begins, they become very short. And you see that in the old Easter Vigil, where Lauds immediately follows the vigil, and it consists of Psalm 150 and the Benedictus and a collect. And I thought there was something both in the length of the readings that's very human, and then also in including lauds immediately after the vigil, allowing the priest and the religious to sleep in the next day. I thought was pretty neat thing. Now, in the present Liturgia Orarum, the editors are explicitly clear that the Easter Lauds is to be said in the morning of Easter Sunday. And I can understand why that is as well. And that's why we have liturgical maturity. We can see the genius of different practices at different times. Because after all, Easter Lauds is the template of all lauds throughout the year, and especially of all festal lauds. And so it is somewhat logical that you would have the text at its appropriate time. So anyway, there's much to be said there. But thus we have entered into Easter time. The final point I would make as we knock off here is not to shortchange ourselves with Easter time. A lot of us do this huge buildup during Lent for Easter Sunday, maybe even Easter week, and then we get on with our life. And we shouldn't do that. We have to remember we are indeed after the Easter Vigil for the next 7-8 weeks, we are walking in a unique way with God's presence amongst us in his resurrection and in our hearts. And so we really need to realize that the Easter liturgies of those 7 weeks are just as rich and just as meaningful, full of meaning, as the Lent focuses. We've only done Lent to get us to the 7-8 weeks of Holy Eastertide. In other words, the story is just beginning with the resurrection and the recreation of the world. So let us all take that as our marching orders as we march into deeper into Holy Week and into the Holy Triduum and into Easter proper, is that things are just beginning after the Easter Vigil. So with that, we'll bring the bird down. And this has been certainly good preparation for me. I hope it's been beneficial for yourselves. Why don't you join us for the liturgy? You can find out about this on our page for the Liturgy and Devotions, our Divine Office tab, and you can see how you can join us online, the staff and students of the Institute. We have the times posted, as well as our stable link. You just click on that when the time is right and hop right in and increase that prayer power. The church is powerful when it prays. It's not to be a martinet at all that the church asks us to pray in congregation. Christians are powerful when we pray in groups. So won't you help us do that? All right. And so with that, we're going to bring the bird down on this presentation from garden to garden, the sacred Triduum, having covered, in a sense, everything from Septuagesima through Easter time. I'll knock off here and leave it there. Wish you a good Holy Triduum and a good Holy Easter, and say Masalama.